When you were younger, you knew that you wanted to become a doctor, and what was it that sort of helped you make up your mind that that was the profession you wanted to go into?
Well, I didn't actually wake up in the morning and say I want to be a doctor. What I did when I did my matric, I met an incredible teacher who taught us physical science. And he used to just turn his desk into a laboratory. And I fell in love with chemistry. So what I wanted to be was a chemist. And he was a retired teacher from the old Transvaal education. And he used to wear a National Party lapel on his. It didn't mean anything to me. He was just a nice teacher who loved me and I loved him. And because I was so thin, because I wasn't eating anything that was not appropriate to my taste, he would even bring me vitamin tablets, multivites to keep me going. And so I said to him, I love this so much, I want to become a chemist. He said, oh, Aletta, that's my middle name. That's very sad. I know you could be a good chemist. But unfortunately, the laws of the land are such that there are no opportunities for you as a chemist. The best you can be is to teach chemistry. And you don't want to be a teacher like your parents. I said, no. I said, well, my advice to you is go into the field of medicine. And that's how he guided me.
So during the time that you were studying, were you really just focused on your studies? You sound like you're a very serious student.
I was very serious in the first year. But and in the second year, the first part of the year, in fact, the second year I was serious, but I started making friends. And that's how I got introduced to politics. And my best friend was across the passageway from my room. She was the woman I befriended most, Vuyelwa Mashalaba. She came from the Eastern Cape, and she was already on the SRC because she arrived there in first year. I arrived in second year because I had to do my pre-meds at the University of the North. And so she introduced me to politics. And once I got to understand this, everything just fell into place, and I just knew, I gotta do this. I gotta know how to contribute to this, because I know that my parents could have been much more successful had there not been this deliberate impoverishment and denigration of people on the basis of the color of their skin. Well, what used to happen is that Vuyelwa Mashalaba introduced me to her circle of friends, many of whom were on the SRC, Charles CBC, Stephen Biko, Balweni, many others. But we were a small group. We are never more than 10, but as the thing grew, we ended up being about 15. And for the first time, I was able to engage with people who didn't look like me. I mean, Indian students of Indian descent, people so-called colored people. And we became a real, a circle of friends. We talked about silly things, but we spent a lot of time figuring out one thing, because all of us came from very poor families. But how is it possible that a country with more than 90% of the people being indigenous can be held hostage as slaves, as less than, by less than 10% of the people? How is that possible? And so when we made that connection, we understood that liberation, freedom is not going to come from the change in laws first. It's going to come from the change inside. When we stopped calling ourselves non-whites, non-Europeans, and believe you me, we came to this conclusion over a weekend. We sent a delegation to Mr. Ho, who was then the principal of the University of Natal. By the end of that week, all the signage had changed. And we felt, gosh, we did it, you know? And that is not so much the signage, it is the power from inside. What he didn't know was that we had self-liberated ourselves from these ideas that other people had of us. And therefore, we were unstoppable as self-liberated people. And yeah, our parents said, you're going to get killed. Yes, a lot of my friends got killed. But without that self-liberation, there's no way we would have been able to establish the Black consciousness movement. There's no way we were going to be able to mobilize as we did. I mean, people now talk about being liberated by the ANC. That's a distortion of history. It's the people of South Africa who were inside the country who liberated the ANC. So the lessons from the Black consciousness movement are that no one can free you except yourself. But when you work together as unfree people to free yourselves, you become the salt of the earth. You become the lights on a hilltop. You help others to do the same. As university students, we went to all the other universities. We went to high schools, which is how Soweto 1976 happened. We didn't say to the young people, go and protest against Bantu education. No, we just got them to understand what we had understood. And then they said, this education is not fit for me because I'm a liberated person. I respect myself. I have dignity and I demand it, right? And the same thing with trade unions, the same thing with Omama Bamanyano, the faith-based communities, etc., where we started. Everything that we did had to be in line with the values of Ubuntu, the values of human dignity and self-respect. First of all, as I indicated, you're up against a government that was determined to make sure that Black people don't get educated above a certain station. And when they do, to keep them in their places. And so we were up against a racist, sexist, and exploitative regime. And that didn't start with the National Party, which is why we were not fighting against apartheid. We're fighting for liberation from the colonial conquerors whose settled children here became the National Party. And so we couldn't have matched them gun for gun, but we matched them with determination of a free people, which is, you can't defeat that. And so the inspiration of that liberation movement, once it got to include the faith-based community, then you can actually start seeing, because our parents came from churches, as I told you. We had stopped going to church because of once your eyes open up and you know that you've got these dominants, who's going to go to church and listen to a racist, right? But clearly there was something more that we also picked up, which is the fear of your oppressor applies not only to racist, but also to sexist. Now, as a woman and Black person, I just made the quick switch. Self-liberation from racism, self-liberation from sexism. No, you'll divide the struggle. That's what my beloved friends said to me. I said, okay, tell me, which part of me am I liberating? The woman or the Black person? No, we're not putting it like that. I said, it's like that, right? The self-liberation applies whether you're talking about a woman self-liberating, a disabled person self-liberating, anything that undermines your capacity to live up to the best potential you were created to be requires the self-liberation.